So, in this first lesson, we're going to have a look at the Latin noun. The first chapter of Latin for the New Millennium introduces you to the first declension noun. And before we get started on that, I want to have a look at what the noun is and how it works in Latin. Okay, so before we get started with the Latin noun, we should think about what the noun is in English. And so, what exactly is a noun? Well, a noun is a word that derives from the Latin word nomen, and this means name, and it's a naming word. It's the part of speech that's used to name a person or a place, a thing, a quality, or an action. And its role in the sentence is that it can function as the subject or object of a verb, and we'll look at that later on in the lesson. It can also be in a positive, we'll see that later on too, or something we'll see later on in a different lesson, can be the object of a preposition. Okay, so although in its basic function, the Latin noun is the same as the English noun, in that it functions as a naming word in the sentence, Latin nouns differ from English nouns in three really important ways. We'll see in the next lesson that Latin nouns use endings to indicate two specific things, whether the noun is singular or plural, so one or many, and this is the number of the noun, and which case the noun is in. So we'll see later on again that there are 5 cases in Latin, and the different endings of the nouns on the Latin words will help you identify which case it is. Every Latin noun also has a specific gender, which we'll look at later on, and you need to learn these genders as you learn the Latin words, because it's going to be very helpful for getting through a sentence. So now we're going to look in more detail at those 3 differences between Latin nouns and English nouns. And the first thing we're going to look at is the number. So the number of the noun indicates whether the noun is singular or plural. And in English, this is really easy. For most words, we just add an S. So in English, poet is singular, but poets is plural. In Latin, you'll notice from the example that the ending of the word helps you work out whether or not the noun is singular or plural. So in Latin, poet is poeta, but poets is poetae. The next thing we need to be concerned with is that every Latin noun has a specific gender. Latin nouns can be one of 3 genders: masculine, feminine, or neuter. And the Latin nouns, when you see them in the vocab list in the book, you'll notice that they always have the gender marked next to them. So with the vocab entry from the first chapter, agricola, agricolae, M, farmer, the M indicates that the word is masculine. And like I said before, it's really important to learn the gender of the noun at the same time as learning the meaning. It will make understanding the text so much easier. So the final difference between the Latin noun and the English noun is that Latin nouns always have a specific case that's indicated by the ending on the word. And the case indicates the function that the noun plays in the sentence. So let's take an English example. The king rules the country. Here in this sentence, the king is the subject of the sentence, i.e., the king performs the action of the verb, the king rules. The country, in the same sentence, is the direct object, and this means that it receives the action of the verb. The country is ruled by the king. In English, for the most part, case is indicated by the position the word has in the sentence. Normal English sentence structure has the subject before the verb, i.e. the king rules, and the direct object after the verb, rules the country. In English, it doesn't really matter what position the word has in the sentence, the form of the word never changes. But Latin word order is much more flexible, and all of the different cases in Latin have different endings, and so you need to learn these endings in order to work out what role the word is playing in the sentence. Latin has 5 major cases. It has the nominative case, which is the case that is used for the subject of the sentence. It has the genitive case, which indicates possession, so of something, of mine. The dative, which is reference, to or for. The accusative, which is the direct object of the sentence. And then the ablative, which has a number of various uses. In this lesson, we're going to look very briefly at the nominative and the accusative cases, and use those to start to form sentences in class. So the first of the cases that we're going to look at is the nominative case. And this case has 2 roles in the sentence. We've already seen the first use of the nominative case in our English example. It indicates the subject of the sentence. And this means the word that performs the action of the main verb. So here in this English example, the farmer takes care of the land. The farmer there is the subject of the sentence because he's performing the action of taking care of the land. In Latin, agricola terram curat, has agricola in the nominative case because he's performing the action of the verb curat. The second use of the nominative is as the predicate. This is a noun in the same case which completes the meaning of the verb to be. So in English, I am, you are, etc. Earlier in this lesson, I called the predicate the appositive. This means the same thing. And to take an English example of this, the poet is a girl. Here, the poet is further described by the noun girl. And in Latin, both of those words are in the nominative. So poeta est puella. Poeta and puella are both in the nominative. Poeta in this sentence is the subject, and puella, which further describes the subject, is the predicate or the appositive. The last thing that we'll look at today is the accusative case. This case indicates the direct object of the verb. So, as we've seen before in English, the noun that receives the action of the verb. We've already looked at this one example when we looked at the nominative, the farmer takes care of the land. Here, the land receives the action of taking care. So in Latin, agricola terram curat. Terram there is in the accusative case, and it's the direct object of the verb curat.